What's up, Human Phys class? This is Mr. Yag going through section 9.4 on human vessels, arteries versus veins. Today we're going to look at the different types of vessels found in the body, what their structure is, what their function is, and then you guys are going to have an opportunity to identify the major arteries and veins in the human body with a diagram. This is probably going to be some of the tougher information in terms of remembering things, because you need to know a fair amount of vessels that are found throughout the body, but nothing as near as you would at a college level, but the important ones. So arteries, strong elastic vessels which carry blood moving away from the heart. That's a key thing to know. Arteries always move away. It's going to be pretty easy. They are usually oxygenated and are going to carry blood to all the tissues. The smallest ones are called arterioles and then capillaries. So if we think about this, an artery is going to go into an arteriole and then into a capillary. So it's kind of like biggest to smallest. Okay? And capillaries are really tiny. There's a picture right here. This would be a capillary bed, and it allows for proper diffusion of all the nutrients and oxygen that's in the blood into the tissues, and then it would absorb up wastes and CO2. Now veins are then going to take those waste products, and they're much thinner, less muscular, and they're going to carry blood back toward the heart. The smallest ones are called venules, and which will then connect to the capillaries. So it's almost like artery, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins. Okay? Alright, so let's talk a little more about capillaries. Their function is very important in the processes of exchanging materials. As you can see up here, things like oxygen, CO2, and nutrients between the blood and the tissues. And it's going to rely heavily on the process of diffusion, which we know is a very passive system. Okay, and they're going to penetrate nearly all tissues. If you've ever gotten a really small paper cut that did not go that deep into the skin, you'll see it slowly ooze out a little bit of blood. Now, the walls are composed of a singular layer of squamous cells, which is a little bit of review for this class. All right, simple squamous cells, and again, we know that that's very thin. They're a flat cell, and it's all about exchange of materials. That's the goal with these. So you can kind of see this would be considered a capillary, arterial, and venous. So you can get the idea that oxygenated blood here, deoxygenated here, nutrients here, waste here. So arteries bring oxygenated blood to the tissues. Veins take deoxygenated blood back. So what really controls this flow of blood? Well, we obviously have the heart. That is the main motor in this system. But if you've ever noticed that sometimes if you felt like your leg fell asleep, or your foot fell asleep, or you sat too much and your butt starts to hurt, or your feet start to hurt, maybe this happened on an airplane, there are other mechanisms in place besides just your heart to beat. We have what we call precapillary sphincters, which is a circular valve-like muscle at arteriocapillary junction, and that's what these little parts are right here. They kind of look like little rubber bands. And their main job is to constrict. A sphincter can be found in many places. We'll learn the digestive system, but that you have a pyloric sphincter and an esophageal sphincter, and that's the two openings of the stomach, one to go in and one to go out. So these are responsible for kind of closing shut. And it is considered to be a valve, so that's going to help blood in and out. Now, we also have two processes, or two terms I essentially want you to know, and that is going to be vasoconstriction, which is a narrowing, and vasodilation, which is an expanding. So if you've ever heard someone say your eyes have dilated, that means that the black portion, the pupil there, has gotten really large to let more light in. Well, in this case, we're talking about blood. That's expanding to allow more blood to move through. So if those of you have ever seen anyone blush in the face, we have vasodilation, which brings blood to the surface of the skin. Now, vasoconstriction would be found when you are probably working out and you need to move a lot of blood. So keep that in mind, vasoconstriction versus vasodilation, and the importance of those precapillary sphincters. Now, on the previous slides, we've talked about how the veins kind of are less muscular. And the blood flow through veins is not always very sufficient. It's usually slow, weak, kind of pushing the blood up back towards the heart. And it relies heavily on arterial blood pressure, which is going to be found in the heart. So if you look at this system here, as the blood moves up out of the aorta here, we got some going up to the head, but it's got to make this long systemic circulation throughout the body. And as it comes back, there's not as much pressure going up against that system. So these veins tend to be very weak. Now, there are some things we can do to help this process along. So with these slow, weak pushing by the arterial blood pressure, it's not really much of a factor. So we rely heavily on the contraction of the diaphragm, which is a muscle found below the lungs. It's going to help us breathe, but that contraction kind of helps bring stuff out. The pumping action of the skeletal muscles. So actually when you stand for long periods of time, that is actually going to stop the blood flow. The fact that you walk around to kind of keep the blood moving, maybe if you've heard that before, that's actually a true statement. So skeletal muscles, as they contract, actually kind of squeeze those veins and help the blood move. Now, the last one is the valves and the veins. Remember, valves allow for one-way flow. So it is vitally important to understand that there's going to be valves throughout this vein, as I'm pointing out here, that are going to prevent any backflow, but also help things moving forward. So those three things are going to be important to remember in terms of how can we help veins be more efficient. All right, let's talk a little bit about some disorders of the circulatory system. MVP is not most valuable player. It is the mitral valve prolapse. And remember what we also call the mitral valve. It does not close all the way, and this can be an issue. And it creates kind of a clicking sound at the end of the contraction. And this would be something that if you used an ECG or even a stethoscope, you could hear that, that valve issue. And that would cause some inefficiencies. It would also cause a loss of pressure. Now, the other one is heart murmurs. That's probably something you've heard of before, and that's when the valve does not close completely. And often it is a harmless murmur sound, but sometimes holes can occur in the septum of the heart, which can also have a murmur, and that can be a little bit more of an issue. So when a valve doesn't close completely, you get a heart murmur. And it almost sounds like, instead of a lub-dub, you have kind of a lub, instead of a lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. So that would be a heart murmur. That'd be something that your doctor would listen for. Myocardial infarction, MI, is a term that you've probably heard in its common name, which is a heart attack. And that means that a blood clot has obstructed a coronary artery, which is the arteries you'll find out when going through the list of vessels that feeds the heart. And when there is an obstruction in there and blood can't pass through, you have a myocardial infarction. And that would be considered a heart attack. All right, another disorder is called atherosclerosis, and that is a deposit of fatty material like cholesterol that forms blockages in the artery, and this will reduce the blood flow, which causes a lot of issues. It can essentially cause hypertension, which as we know is high blood pressure. And there's two surgeries that you've probably heard of in terms of how we can treat this. First one is an angioplasty. Remember, angio is one of those words we use in our prefixes, and it's essentially putting a catheter inserted into artery and a balloon. And that balloon is going to be inflated once it gets to the area that has an issue, and that'll stretch it open. You can also, instead of using a balloon, input a stent, or which we have right here. What is a stent? Well, a stent is actually going to be kind of a mesh tubing that is going to go in there and kind of keep that artery wall open. Now, another option, which is very common if an angioplasty is not going to work, is they actually completely bypass some of the arteries, meaning that they essentially don't go through the main road and kind of put like a frontage road around it. So they bypass or detour the blood vessels surgically so that the blood doesn't flow through the blockage anymore. Some ways that they would do this, a lot of times they'll take some of your femoral artery in your thigh. I know my grandpa had a double bypass, and he has 2 scars in the inner portions of his thighs where they just basically took probably about 6 inches of his blood vessel and put it up into his heart, and then kind of stretched the one out in his leg. So there's some ways that you can do this, and that's a very, very safe procedure. It's been very successful. Both of these are actually very safe, and it's essentially just getting rid of that blockage, that atherosclerosis. So that wraps up our notes, at least for this unit. You've gone through 4 sections. Your next goal is to tackle looking at the human vessels. Now, I have a diagram for you, and it's kind of up to you how you go and research it. I highly recommend finding an online source and just jotting down where these are all located, but you are responsible for the ones that are highlighted or marked in that sheet. So grab one of those sheets. Make sure you take an opportunity to get online, or if you want to use some of the textbooks that I have in my room, you are more than welcome to. And jot those down on a sheet. Take some time to study them. We're going to go over them and review them a little bit. But make sure you have all your notes together and you've been studying. We'll have a test probably in the next couple days here, depending on your outline. As always, if you have questions, feel free to email me if I am not there, or hopefully you can talk to me in class. All right, we'll talk to you later. Yago out.